Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Boss Economics World, your one-stop shop for dismantling economic nonsense, exposing government blunders, and serving up piping hot truths about the financial mess we're all stuck in. I'm your host, the no-nonsense number cruncher who's here to tell it like it is, whether you're a hardworking Joe trying to make ends meet or a Wall Street hotshot sipping lattes while watching the world burn. Today, we've got a real doozy, Donald Trump's latest economic brainstorm, a masterclass in short-term thinking that could send the economy into a tailspin faster than you can say, budget deficit. So, buckle up, grab your calculators, and let's dive into the madness. Oh, folks, here we go again. Donald Trump is back in the White House, and he's already got his sights set on the Federal Reserve, waving his magic wand of economic wisdom like it's 2018 all over again. His latest pitch? Slash interest rates, not because the economy needs it, not because inflation is under control, but because, wait for it, the government's debt bill is getting too spicy. That's right, folks, Trump's trying to strong-arm Fed Chair Jerome Powell into cutting rates by 2 percentage points to save a cool $600 billion a year on interest costs. Sounds like a genius plan, right? Wrong. It's a one-way ticket to inflation town, population, all of us suffering. Let's break this down, shall we? According to the Treasury's latest figures, and trust me, these numbers are scarier than a horror movie jump scare, the U.S. government shelled out a whopping $776 billion in interest payments on federal debt over the past 8 months. That's up 7% from the same period last year, when the interest burden was already the highest since the 1990s. And get this, that $776 billion is more than what we're spending on national defense. Yes, folks, we're spending more to service our debt than to keep the tanks rolling and the jets flying. How's that for priorities? Now, let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture, because this debt monster didn't just appear out of thin air. The federal debt has ballooned to over $34 trillion, yes, trillion with a T, thanks to a cocktail of COVID-era spending sprees, multiple rounds of tax cuts, looking at you, Trump's 2017 tax bonanza, and, of course, the Fed's battle against inflation, which jacked up interest rates to levels we hadn't seen in decades. Moody's Ratings, not exactly known for being alarmists, downgraded the U.S. sovereign credit rating in May 2025, citing, surprise, surprise, rising debt costs as a key reason. But Trump's solution? Oh, it's a beaut. Instead of addressing the root causes of this fiscal mess, like, say, reining in spending or rethinking tax policy, he's decided the Fed should just lower interest rates to make the debt cheaper to service. Problem solved, right? Wrong again. This is like putting a band-aid on a broken leg and then running a marathon. Sure, it might feel good for a hot minute, but you're gonna crash and burn, and take the rest of us with you. Now, let's talk about the Fed, because poor Jerome Powell must feel like he's stuck in a bad reality TV show, with Trump as the overbearing producer screaming, "Make it happen, Jerry." Trump's been pressuring the Fed to cut rates ever since he waltzed back into the Oval Office, claiming it's all part of his grand plan to transition the economy to higher tariff levels. But here's the kicker, the Fed's job isn't to bail out the government's budget woes. Congress gave the Fed a dual mandate, price stability and maximum employment. Notice how helping the White House pay its bills isn't on the list. Economists are sounding the alarm, and for good reason. Michael Farrelly, chief U.S. economist at J.P. Morgan Chase, put it bluntly, unless warranted by macroeconomic conditions, lowering interest rates would spark higher inflation and ultimately higher nominal interest rates. Translation: if the Fed caves to Trump's pressure and cuts rates just to save on debt costs, it risks reigniting inflation, a beast we've only just started to tame. And guess what happens then? Investors ditch U.S. Treasuries faster than rats fleeing a sinking ship, bond yields spike, and the government's interest bill gets even worse. Oh, and let's not forget the long-term damage to the Fed's credibility. If the central bank starts bowing to political pressure, it undermines its independence, a cornerstone of modern monetary policy. Imagine a world where every president can just lean on the Fed to fund their pet projects. Fiscal discipline. Out the window. Inflation. Through the roof. Economic stability. Kiss it goodbye. Now, let's talk about the real elephant in the room, the wave of maturing debt that's about to hit us like a tsunami. According to Nomura Holdings, the U.S. has over $7 trillion of debt set to mature by the end of 2025. That's right, folks, $7 trillion worth of IOUs that need to be refinanced, and guess what? Interest rates are a heck of a lot higher now than they were when this debt was issued back in 2020, during the height of the pandemic rescue packages. Back then, the Fed was keeping rates near zero to prop up the economy. Now, with rates at their highest in decades, refinancing that debt is going to cost us an arm, a leg, and probably a kidney, too. Trump's argument is that cutting rates would almost certainly make a material difference in lowering the interest burden, as Nomura's David Seif put it. But here's the catch, and it's a big one, those benefits would be short-lived if inflation expectations start rising. And let's be real, folks, inflation expectations don't just rise, they skyrocket when you start monkeying around with monetary policy for political gain. But wait, there's more. Trump's not just banking on rate cuts to fix the debt mess, he's also pushing a shiny new tax cut package that fiscal watchdogs say will make the borrowing problem even worse. The Congressional Budget Office, that pesky nonpartisan killjoy, estimates that the debt service cost of the House version of the tax bill will add $551 billion to the deficit over the next decade. But don't worry, folks, Trump's got a plan. He's promising that tariff revenues and faster economic growth will magically offset the cost of these tax cuts. Let's unpack this, shall we? First, tariffs. Trump loves to tout tariffs as a silver bullet, but here's the dirty little secret: tariffs are a tax on consumers. When you slap tariffs on imports, prices go up, and guess who pays the piper? You, me, and every hardworking American trying to buy groceries or a new pair of sneakers. The Peterson Institute for International Economics estimated in 2024 that Trump's proposed tariff hikes could cost the average U.S. household $1,700 a year. And that's before we even get to the retaliation from trading partners, which could tank U.S. exports and slow economic growth. Second, this faster economic growth fairy tale. Sure, tax cuts can stimulate growth in the short term, but the data tells a different story over the long haul. Look at the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, Trump's signature achievement from his first term. The U.S. economy grew at an average annual rate of just 2.1% from 2017 to 2019, according to World Bank data, barely above the 1.9% average under Obama. And that's before the pandemic derailed everything. Meanwhile, the federal deficit ballooned by $2 trillion over the same period, per CBO estimates. So much for paying for itself. Of course, no Trump economic commentary would be complete without blaming the Biden administration for everything under the sun. A senior White House official claimed that unsustainable interest payments are a product of Biden's economic policies. Oh, really? Let's fact-check that, shall we? Yes, Biden's $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan in 2021 added fuel to the inflationary fire. Core inflation hit 9.1% in June 2022, the highest in 40 years, per the Bureau of Labor Statistics. But let's not forget that Trump's own COVID-era stimulus packages, totaling over $3 trillion, played a massive role in ballooning the debt in the first place. And those tax cuts we talked about? They slashed corporate tax rates from 35% to 21%, costing the Treasury $1.9 trillion over a decade, according to the CBO. So, maybe, just maybe, the fiscal mess isn't just Biden's fault, it's a bipartisan train wreck years in the making. So, what's the real answer, folks? Spoiler alert, it's not cutting rates to bail out the government, and it's not more tax cuts or tariff hikes that end up hurting everyday Americans. The real solution is fiscal responsibility, balancing the budget, reining in spending, and yes, maybe even raising taxes on the ultra-wealthy to fund critical investments. But good luck getting that through Congress, where both parties seem addicted to spending like there's no tomorrow. Just look at the latest bipartisan infrastructure deal in June 2025, which added $1.2 trillion to the deficit over the next decade, according to the CBO. Everyone loves bridges and roads, but no one wants to pay for them. Here's the scariest part, folks: if Trump gets his way and the Fed caves, we could be staring down the barrel of a full-blown recession. J.P. Morgan's fairly warned that if inflation reignites thanks to premature rate cuts, bringing it back under control might require a painful recession, which would lower nominal incomes and tax revenue, further aggravating the fiscal situation. And don't think the markets haven't noticed. The yield on 10-year treasuries spiked to 4.8% in June 2025, the highest since 2011, reflecting growing investor jitters about the U.S. debt trajectory. Meanwhile, consumer confidence, as measured by the Conference Board, dipped to its lowest level since early 2023, signaling that everyday Americans are feeling the pinch of higher prices and economic uncertainty. So, there you have it, folks, another day, another economic dumpster fire courtesy of our fearless leaders in Washington. Trump's plan to strong-arm the Fed into rate cuts might sound like a quick fix, but it's a recipe for disaster: higher inflation, higher debt costs, and maybe even a recession to top it all off. But hey, at least the tariffs will make your sneakers more expensive, right? Stay tuned to Boss Economics World, where we'll keep calling out the nonsense and fighting for the little guy. Until next time, keep your wallets close and your skepticism closer.